We're just waiting for people to be populated, and then we'll start. This is always so exciting. All right, do you think we should start, Bill?
Yeah, go ahead, Stacy.
Great, great. Well, welcome to the last webinar that Rotary Peace Fellows Alumni Association is doing. This webinar is called Performing Peace, Creativity as a Tool to Understand Social Processes and Defending Life. The Zoom webinar is a part of our series of the Rotary Peace Fellow Association preceding the Cyber Peace Conference that's happening 27th and 26th and 27th. And the purpose of this webinar is to explore how the creative arts approach can co-create spaces for transformation, self-determination, and the voice of communities that are made vulnerable and pushed out to the margins. The art-based panel consists of a variety of modalities, including music, dance, storytelling, visual arts, and visually based research approaches. This is a 90-minute webinar, and it takes place from 8 a.m. to 9:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And so, with further ado, I'd like to start with our first presentation, and Neil, take it away.
All right, thanks, Stacy. I'm just putting my time on. Up. Okay, so I have 8 minutes now to blow your mind. So yeah, I want to present about tool that we have developed together with, we were 4 experts who are working on using physical activities and artistic activities within our work with refugee relief field. And actually this tool was created through one big event that was organized by 2 organizations in Germany and in Turkey, as with the aim to actually, you know, create tools that could fit the two situations in both countries. So here, if everybody can see my screen, I think that's fine, okay. So the tool that we created is called Dancing Matters. And actually it was created, so as I said, for the field of refugee relief, but I need to say that when we talk about matters of refugees, we have to understand what is migration, what is forced migration, and what it means to be uprooted. And in that sense, what we were aiming to do is to create a space for adolescents where they can rethink about that cultural baggage that they carry with themselves in their body, and that is actually rich and powerful. And to reframe that so that they can build agency over that cultural baggage that they are carrying. So how the tool works is that we have, I mean, just to be a bit more familiar maybe with the concepts, we use this concept of agency. So it's the ability to act upon one's life, their own life. And the physical memory is the principle that we use as this carrier of this agency, of that cultural agency that adolescents have, people who have been uprooted do have. So the first thing I need to say is that this is actually a tool that is really made for communities, and that can be used in 5 sessions. It can be broken up into 5 week sessions. And all those sessions, as you can see in the circle there, they are aiming at different at a different purpose each time. So the first session is to understand. In order to do that, we chose some people that we called the dancing volunteers. And we tell their stories, and children listen to their stories. So I just want to show you a little part of that story so that you can have an example.
Neil, the audio is not coming through on this. Would you like me to share it for you?
Oh, sure. Okay.
Okay, just 1 second. Okay, make sure. Here we are.
مع الرقص لما برقص مثلا لما برقص الباقية هي الرقصة بالذات بتذكرني بالأعراس. لما الرقص بيرجعك لورا بالزمن بيذكرك أكيد بيذكرك بلحظات سعيدة، لأنه أنت ما بترقص غير لما بتكون سعيد، وبيحسن مزاجك كمان، وبياخذك لأماكن أنت ما لك شايفها صار لك سنين. أول مرة شفت فيها هي الرقصة الباقية كانت لما كان عمري تقريبا 13 أو 14 سنة. كان يعني بالضبط كان بعرس خالي بالضيعة. فشفت الناس عم يرقصوا وحبيت أتعلمها. بعدين شوي أظن إنه خالتي أو حدا ما بتذكر بالضبط. بالأول فرجت عليهم كيف عم يرقصوها، بعدين حفظت الخطوات، بعدين تعلمتها، بعدين صرت أرقصها بالعرس نفسه بالأعراس اللي بعدها طبعا. وهيك. لأنه أنا عشت بحلب، ما ولدت بعفرين وما كنت بعفرين، اللي هي مدينة الأم لإلي. الشخص انه ماله عايش بعفرين وما بيعرف عن تقاليدها كثير، فحبيت انه اكون مشابه لهم اكثر، لانه كلهم اقربائي اللي هنيك والناس بحبهم وبعرفهم. فكانت كمان مثل ما قلت انه هي تعلمي انه الرقص هي الرقصه او الشغلات الثانيه او اي شيء ثاني، الشغلات التقليديه الثانيه كانت بتساعدني على اني احس اني اكثر اني جزء منهم واني مشابه اكثر لهم.
Thank you. Okay. Yes, so let's continue on the presentation. So as you can see in this video, actually that person, Salah, is telling how his own overlapping migrational paths have built his identity and how he's carrying them with himself. So he's from Syria and he's had to leave the war, but even before that, he's a Kurdish in Syria who already had been displaced. And inside all those stories, after being in Istanbul, now he will go to Canada and start trying to live another story, which is also comprised in the video that I don't have time now to show you the full. But the first thing is to try to understand how, for example, a person like Salah has taken upon his own initiative, his agency to build himself, his identity, and to carry it with himself wherever he goes throughout his migrational path. In the second session that we do with the children, we have another video where Salah actually explains step by step this dance that is called Vagiye and how to dance it. So the children do actually practice the dance and they learn one by one each steps of that dance, and they do have the physical experience of doing it. The next session is about the experience, where children, adolescents can start to reflect upon their own history and their own cultural baggage that they are themselves carrying. Having a migrational path or not, it doesn't matter, because what matters is what they carry inside their bodies, inside their beings as physicals. And the fourth session is to construct, where children use more like visual art tools where they can narrate and own the narrative of their own path and their own cultural heritage through doing posters, drawings, and so on. And at the end, the fifth session is where they can share. So they have an exhibition where they do show to each other what was their migrational or not path, what was their cultural path, and how they are building agency upon it, and how they can themselves now become those dancing volunteers, just like Salah is actually. So just to finish quickly, I'm over my time, I'm sorry, but just a few tips on how to participate. So you can use this tool within your own community. We can provide training of trainers to help you to do that. You can become a dance volunteer just like Salah, and we can build new materials. And you can also support the implementation across different places. I left my email here, and those are the links to the tool that are totally online and publicly available that I can share later on. Thank you for listening. Sorry for being late.
Thank you so much. I also wanted to show everyone that the book that has come out of this project, which is fantastic, and it has a Neil, correct me if I'm wrong, it has a step-by-step, and it's just, it's absolutely beautiful.
There's a USB stick inside where you have all the video content.
Yep, right there.
The aim is to make more video content so that there are actually more examples of this dance volunteer.
Yeah, it's absolutely stunning project that's happening. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. So we're going to move on to Nora, and Nora's going to talk about the benefits and challenges and ethics of using visual and arts-based methods to research. Go ahead.
Thanks, Staci. So much of my research and community work with multi-sectoral teams and communities and populations made vulnerable, and especially youth, have used participatory and arts-based and visual methods. So let me see if I can figure out how to share my screen. There we go. Yay, let's see if it works. Can you see that? Okay, everyone's nodding their head yes. I'm trying to make it so it's, there we go. Okay, so when arts-based methods are combined with reciprocity and concerted efforts to center participants' perspectives, they can help expose hidden resources and counter narratives and be tools for community transformation. So I'll give you an example of how visual methods can help foster community transformations. So in 2010, the Bhutan Youth Development Fund requested Genuine Progress Index Atlantic in Canada to provide participatory action research training for an extensive and very active youth-led network across Bhutan called the Young Volunteers in Action, or the YVIA. So the focus of participatory action research, or PAR, is to enable action. It purposely shifts power so that youth become full and active partners in the whole research process, and it assumes that the solutions to problems identified already exist within the community. So I coordinated this program from 2010 to 2017, and we, including Canadian youth interns, engaged new and existing YVIA from remote and economically poor communities to develop research action skills. And then in later phases, they became the trainers. And then youth use these skills to identify community development priorities and put their ideas into action to create what they call Gukit villages, or happy villages. And youth drew pictures and maps and used a variety of visual tools and methods, like taking photographs, to capture their community's strengths and challenges, and then they shared these within their communities. So here's an example of an image that one of the youth took. And you can see here that the youth who took the image, they reflect on the community issue that they care about, which is pollution and global warming and burning of plastic. And then they also talk at the end about potential solutions like building environmental awareness and learning how to compost and recycle. And so these kinds of images were shared within community forums, which had the effect of garnering support, resources, time, and new linkages from elders, other youth, NGOs, and policymakers. And their actions had incredible impact. So young women weavers in Umsang now have a weaving shelter, sewing machines, training support to create value-added cultural products. They began a child hygiene program, and a new greenhouse improved food security. In Serang, they initiated a literacy program where they go twice a week to teach reading and writing to women and children in really remote, hard-to-reach places. And they created peer-to-peer environmental awareness programs, worked with elders to halt biodiversity loss, and initiated successful zero waste recycling programs. So when youth create images, they understand the conversation is going to be driven by them, but also the process encourages them to think about why they want to capture that image. And so you can sometimes see some really poignant symbolism in their images. So here's an example. So the youth said, "This photo makes me happy because it signifies beginning, new beginning to life after harsh winter. It gives symbolism to new hope. Even if we fail once, we can start again. As to the community, if we work together, we can give rise to new hope. Hope is like a feather, I think, beauty of nature." And visual and arts-based research methods can also expose hidden resources and processes. So here's an example from a project that I coordinated called the Negotiating Resilience Project at the Resilience Research Center in Canada. We collected 16 case studies of youth considered to be coping well despite forced or other forms of displacement. And these were in communities in Canada, India, Thailand, South Africa, and China. And so with our local partners and local researchers, we used mapping, photo elicitation, and filming a day in the life of participants to understand their experiences of trauma, risk, and resilience, and how they make meaning from those experiences. And then the visual materials were taken back to the youth, and they reflected on these, and that became part of the analysis as well. And participants could orchestrate their days, their film days, any way they wanted to. So really they determined which parts of their lives that they wanted to share. And one of these days that I was involved in filming, it was very fun, was with Neil, a 14-year-old living in a more impoverished neighborhood next to an increasingly gentrifying urban area. And he spent much of his day walking with friends in this really well-off neighborhood. So at one point, oh my gosh, this is where I realized I'm really more like 14-year-old boy because it was really fun. But at one point, two of the boys cross the street and the other two stay on the other side of the street. And they start playing this game across the traffic called imaginary football, where they're pretending to throw a football across the traffic. And then they start imaginary skipping rope, where two youth are on the opposite sides of the road, completely safe, but pretending they have a giant skipping rope. And one youth is standing on the sidewalk pretending to jump. And of course, it has the effect of stopping some of the cars stop, and lots of honking and bemused looks. And so I took these clips back to Neil, and he was honestly very surprised that I included them. And he told us, yeah, to be honest, we actually kind of do that a lot. Never anything bad, just to watch them slow down. Instead of viewing Neil's risk-taking as deviant, we began to reflect on a counter-narrative. So the content in Neil's video and his reflections on it showed us as much about his community and its support structures as it does about him. We noted the invisibility of adult involvement during his day, and there were barely any recreation spaces for youth in his community. So his experimentation with risk afforded Neil experiences of power, rites of passage, and bonding with his friends in a context that provides very little formal space for this. So finally, I guess I can shut this now. Don't really know how. And I don't know if it's still stop share. There we go. Yay me. So finally, I want to talk about contextually situated ethics and visual ethics, because using visual and audiovisual research methods brings in a whole new slew of ethical concerns. Ensuring anonymity and confidentiality is problematic because the data portrays images of the participants. And so we've really worked in all the teams that I've worked with, we really have developed really strong ethics protocols and consent processes. And importantly, we work really slowly in the communities to build trust and reciprocity and to make sure that youth are aware of any of the potential risks for their involvement. For example, well, I don't have time to go into all the things that have happened, but so some of the things that we've done to make sure youth are consenting and know what's happening is that, for example, they can blur their faces. They're given the opportunity, if they want, to say they want their faces blurred or not to use any of the images at all. So we take everything back to the youth, have them review it, and if they choose, they can tell us within a period of time, I don't want this statement said or this image, etc. They also control what the day looks like. So they can request at any time for the camera to be shut off, when they need a break, when they need privacy, and they decide when the end of filming occurs. We also have really stringent bystander protocols in case somebody walks into the framing of the video, for example, in that method. And those are just a few of the things. So, and in the field, you constantly have to make spontaneous judgments about ethics. So the context of fieldwork is always contextual, relational, embodied, and politicized. And these concerns are even more pertinent if you're doing research in the context of difference, inequalities, or geopolitics, and with populations made vulnerable. So collaborating meaningfully, and I'm almost done, and I'm sure I'm over, with participants as researchers obliges us to consider our role in co-constructing the relationship, the generation and interpretation of the data, and the potential impacts of our work. So through our selection, dissemination processes, we have the power to decide which images are worthy. What are we sharing? What are we inquiring about? And as Krieger states, without reflexive consideration, we can unintentionally reproduce structures of hierarchy and domination already embedded in our visual world. So this is kind of a call to see not only our research work, but our community development work as embedded in broader contexts of power. And thank you.
That's absolutely fantastic. As a fellow researcher, Nora's research is a gold standard and something that we should all look at closely. The next speaker that we'll have is Justin, and Justin is going to talk about Native American creative approaches to sovereignty and justice.
Thank you, Stacy. Thank you, Bill, Nil, and thank you, Nora. My talk and my presentation is similar to Nora, so it's perfect that we are right next to each other. First, I want to let you all know that I speak to you today from Ohlone territory, and I work in South Bend at the Kroc Institute for International Peace Studies, which is Pokagon territory. And most all of us in our own work, we start with a land recognition. And that is just to say that I think it's important to think about the intersections of power, intersections of injustice, displacement, and also land. So what I'm going to speak to you today is two things. Let me share my screen. I'm going to speak to you about two things here. One is how I approach creativity in my own work, in my own praxis. And two is how I utilize creativity through filmmaking and through storytelling. So let's see here. I think you all see what I'm sharing. I'll just leave it at that. Okay. So how I approach creativity in my praxis. I work with Indigenous peoples in South Dakota, in Hawaii, and also in the Philippines. And a lot of these photographs, or all these photographs that you'll see, are photographs that I've taken on certain film projects or working with communities. So the way I look at it is I think that there are three ways to conceptualize what creative means. And when I talk about creative, I'm talking about creative approaches to sovereignty, or you would say creative approaches to agency, expression, or ways of being. So on the first level, creativity can be seen as a means, right? It's sort of a creative means to express yourself. So that could be done similar to what Nora was talking about, similar to things like photo voice, where you allow people, community members, to take photographs and speak about them, story work, also community generated film, anything that involves either individual or community expression. In Native studies, there is a concept called visual sovereignty, which essentially points to this notion that if we think of sovereignty only as legal sovereignty, we are already eliminating a large swath of activity that includes creativity, arts, dance, music, other ways to show that you're a flourishing people. So that's creative means, the first one. The second one is this notion of sort of creative conceptually, to be thinking out of the box, to be able to use your imagination to reimagine your condition, right? It's to read society and put it into different terms. It's kind of what you would see in Native studies and also African-American studies, people using futurisms, right? It's to reimagine one's condition, not just an expression or a means, but also to reimagine. So that's the second notion. So we have a means of being creative, and then we also have a conceptual creativity. So this involves analysis. It involves an assessment of social reality and also the social condition. And it also involves this notion of being critical. And when I say critical, I'm talking about a tradition from sociology, critical theorists, critical theory of folks who look at how the world is first structured and then how it can be restructured. So attentiveness to language, to convention, to power, to margins, right? Creative conceptually involves this critical approach. Lastly, creativity could also be seen as something that's spiritual, right? To bring something into being is an inherently spiritual process. And this is why when we see communities working with creative means, it's not just that mundane activity of just creating, but it's also a reading of one's society, but then it's also this embodied spiritual approach that connects one to the creator. When you think of, say, for instance, like in Islam, there's 99 names for the creator, and one of the most heralded is the creator, one who fashions, right? One who brings something into being. You also have multiple names of God in Christianity and also within the Baha'i faith, and all of those also very much foreground the power of creativity to bring into being. So in Indigenous studies, let me take one step back. When we talk about conceptual creativity, there's a concept that corresponds with that that's called Indigenous Resurgence, which is folks up in North in Canada who say, how can we engage the state without reifying or making real those same mechanisms? How can we think beyond the state, right? And then when it comes to spirituality, the question is, are there spiritual approaches to expression, to creativity, to agency, to sovereignty? And that's some of the work that I've been working on, thinking about how do we expand our concepts and conceptualizations of sovereignty. So we have these three elements, right? And these three elements, they come together to allow for a full expression of humanity. So in Lakota territory, people have long hair and they create braids in their hair, particularly the men, but also the women, and they use 3 braids. And each of those braids stand for something. One stands for the body, another one stands for the mind, and the other one stands for the spirit. And all 3 of those are woven together to represent what it is a full human experience. Likewise, when we think of creativity as engaging the body, engaging the mind, but also engaging the spirit, we allow for this space where we actually meet people where they are as full human beings. And we envision a world where people can be, right? They can be without judgment, without injustice, without being defined by outside colonial spaces, as Nora pointed towards, right? It weaves together something that is what we already are. Okay, so I walked you through my understanding of how I engage creativity. Now let me walk briefly through how I use film and creativity. So I work as a filmmaker, but also I make films. I also teach people how to make films and use storytelling. And the way that I do this is I look at the Lakota structure of the teepee. And when you think of a teepee, you often think of shelter from the storm, a dwelling, right? But it's actually more than that. Interestingly, it recreates an entire worldview of the Lakota people. The first 3 poles. So first off, you don't just take 3 poles that you find laying on the ground, or you cut down the first 15 trees that you see, 12 trees that you see, but rather you find a family of trees. And you offer a prayer before you cut them down and say, just as you've been able to keep your family safe and strong, we ask that you keep our family safe and strong. And then you can cut down the poles. And if you inherit a bunch of poles that don't know each other, you set them aside together for some time so they can start developing relationships. The first 3 poles are directly correspondent to various constellations in the sky. The east is always the direction of the door because that's the direction of the creator. And every single pole is directly correspondent to some value of that culture. So the next 7 poles are for the 7 directions: north, south, east, west, up, down, and internal. The last 2 poles represent the arms of a mother because they're the doors. They're the ones that you put the bear hides on and close the door to keep everyone safe. So the mother's embrace encloses the entire nation. So every single aspect of the creation of the teepee is so intentional that it recreates the world that they want to live in. The process of them making a teepee is equally as important to the actual structure and product, so to speak. And that's the approach that we take with filmmaking, similar to what Nora was mentioning, where it's about how you're doing things is equally as important of what the outcome is. So we look at filmmaking in relationship to a teepee, in the sense that this structure keeps you safe, and then this film could actually represent you and all your peoples and all Native peoples for centuries, for generations. And so what would that level of intentionality require? And so we started this Native film and storytelling program, which was at UC San Diego in 2018. I'll just play video. You'll see it as it goes, but I'll mute it. I will share that document, that video with you through the links. But it brought 25 Native youth together to make films, to learn how to make films, but it also paired it with Indigenous and feminist theory around representation. And we also imbued it with Indigenous approaches to storytelling, right? Traditional approaches to storytelling. A few of the participants now and I are working on feature-length film that's going to be filmed in Six Nations Reserve outside of Toronto, and also working with urban youth in Toronto. I'll share that presentation. I'll share that video with you later. Okay, so let's see here. In summary, or in closing, I want to suggest that creativity is one of the most central qualities of human beings, but I also want to suggest that it's, let me stop sharing. There we go. So creativity is one of the most central qualities of communities and of peace. When one is able to not only express themselves with their body, but also be able to think out of the box, and also an expression of spirituality, it means and implies there's some sense of security and routine and community, right? And so in spaces of insecurity and fracture, if we're able to use creativity to bring a semblance of peace, routine, and community, then that is one step closer to full expression, and also obviously peace. I suggest that creativity is more than just a mundane exercise, but it's also an embodied, imaginative, and spiritual exercise. It's a place where the whole being can be engaged through mind, body, and spirit. Thank you.
That's fantastic, Justin. Thank you very much. Right now, we're going to open up question and answer for about 10 minutes. So if you want to have a question, if you can put it in the chat box, and I'll read it out. And then In fact, there are a number of questions already posted. One of the questions, and this might be for all of you because all of you do a lot of participatory work, is kind of the question is, one of the questions is, it would be great to see the arts program greatly expanded and many more youth to document their day, especially as most are at home without nothing to do. It could be really stimulating with their creativity. Is this something that you would think about doing right now under, you know, some of us are under shelter in place or during COVID-19? How would you use this arts and peace building in your homes? That could go to anyone.
Okay, so actually with our NGO, Bomobu, we have developed a project right now where we are developing 30 different videos, tools, and also printed materials that are accessible in different languages that are spoken in Turkey and also in sign language that will enable children to do safe and fun physical activities while they are at home and recover about their bodily rights and freedoms while they have to stay in the house at the moment.
If I could weigh in here as well, I think creative means allows us to reflect on who we are, how we are, and when we are. And I think the when, which is right now, is a very unique moment where we see a paradigmatic shift afoot. Not only did we have to isolate ourselves and start asking ourselves questions about what it means to be in community and what it means about self and community, but now we also have a lot of race consciousness in the fore of a lot of people's minds around the world, which is also great. So I think that there are these great shifts that are happening. And in order for us to think about how to build into the future, that's what peace building is, I think we have to have some type of tool or multiple tools to allow us to reflect on what's going on. And so I think whether it's through photographs, whether it's through journaling, whether it's through painting, whether it's through any creative means, if you were to do this with a community and or your own community or individually, one would really be taking advantage of what are the shifts in consciousness of the world that are taking place and how are we navigating them personally and as a community, so that when we are able to share and think about what do we build next, we have those emotions, the spiritual engagements and those bodily engagements encapsulated and preserved so that we have something to build off of. So I would definitely encourage everyone to think creatively about how to make sense of today.
I saw something and I thought, oh, this is really amazing for this time. And it was it was a political statement, actually. It was like, because arts programs and different programs are continually being cut. When it comes to cutting something, those will be probably music, arts, different things, the first things to go. And I saw somebody write that, okay, here we're in this sort of isolation period in our homes or whatever. And what is it that we're all doing? Well, we are online, or we are creating art, and now more than ever we're seeing, with movies or whatever it is, with music, people are creating these beautiful shared spaces. For example, where I'm from in Nova Scotia, people are sharing music, and now it's spread around the world, and it's really powerful to wake up every morning and see people around the world playing music, and a lot of it's focused on music for peace. So I think now we're starting to see, or hopefully see, in a broader way, that the diverse forms of value, the way that the creative arts and other approaches are important right now and always.
Please send your questions to the chat. I have a question for myself because I think Justin said something very profound about reimagining one's own condition. And I would love to send this out to all three of you in thinking about how you're already pushing the margins and pushing beyond the status quo, but can you give us an example of how one can, with research or with film, push against the status quo, particularly right now?
Well, I don't know about research or video, but we have a dance program that is actually designed and is being implemented by Nazlı Durak, who is presenter right now in this room, and it's called I Am What I Am. And we move the status quo on the bodies of women. We work with adolescent girls, and we use rap music and hip hop dancing so that girls can reaffirm and rethink and challenge all the pressures that are put on their body, on their individuals. Those girls are at the same time, they are extremely vulnerable. They have a background of displacement. And so yeah, through this dancing and through actually, like being inspired by what others across the ocean have achieved through that tool, they can embody and they can themselves perform the fact that they can come above all those barriers that they were put for them by the society one by one.
Thanks for the question, Stacy. Reimagining one's own condition. I was speaking to a Native educator recently, and he was mentioning that when he was a young boy, the first time he encountered racism, he didn't know what to do with it because you don't have the language. So he swallowed it. And he was mentioning how it's the process of swallowing poison. That if you swallow poison when you're young and then you keep swallowing, 20 years down the road, you might have kidney failure or lung failure or the preconditions for a pandemic. And it's difficult to point it back to that instance of racism, but it builds and builds and builds, and it's toxic and it'll kill you from the inside. In 2016 in Manitoba County up in Canada, there was a state of emergency declared by one of the First Nations communities because in 2 weeks, there was 140 suicide attempts, right? So this is to say that historical trauma and historical oppression is real and it has an impact. When I work with youth, when we talk about storytelling and film, a lot of them talk about these stories that are stuck in their throat, right? It's almost analogous to if there's a boot on your throat, you need to get that boot off your throat in order for you to imagine what you're gonna do the rest of the day. In order to be able to speak about the future, you need to get that story out of your throat. And once you do, then you can start writing about comedies. You can start writing about futurisms. You can start writing about a young boy who lost their goat. A Navajo student of mine wrote a story about a goat. Then you can start having that full expression, but you need to get that boot off your neck, that story out of your throat. One of the powers of film, I think, and story as well, is that not only are you able to meet the so-called other, you can meet other people, but you also engage in a process where you can meet yourself. When we watch great films and we hear great stories, we're meeting other people's worlds, but ultimately we're learning more about ourselves, right? And so that is to say that the process of making films and storytelling is so important in itself. When we work with youth around, say, for instance, we're doing painting with young kids, we don't evaluate the quality of their painting by whether it hangs in 2 or 3 galleries or any galleries at all. It could be on the refrigerator. It could be nowhere. It could end up just in their own backpack, and yet it still could be a success. But when we think of film, for some reason, we evaluate filmmaking processes by the product. If we can't see the film, was there even a process, right? I would suggest that even the process of expression, community and individual, alone is one that can not only release the knee or the foot or the boot or the story out of one's throat, but then in turn, it also can allow people to start thinking about the future in not only meeting themselves, not only meeting other people, but then also meeting themselves.
Fantastic. Nora, I'm going to give you 1 minute and then we're going to move on. I'm so sorry.
That's okay. I just wanted to jump off of what Justin was saying, because I've worked for a long time too in Nova Scotia with Mi'kmaq, and there was this really beautiful experience that I had and we had together, where elders were talking about historical and generational trauma, and sort of like akin to this boot on the throat idea and the poison we drink. If we drink the poison every day, what happens? And I think it is a resistance to that. In that moment, an elder said, but we also have, we each of us have medicine inside of us. And so I just thought, okay, that's really interesting that Justin mentioned that, and I wanted to add that. And so I think part of this process of creativity and spirituality intertwined, that is part of the medicine.
That's fantastic. That's a great insights. One of the things that I would love to do is, and I'm going to share my screen, is we're going to do breakout sessions. And one of the things that I like us to think about is what kind of action would we want to do in Rotary clubs with regarding to applying arts and peace building. And also, you know, we've had some challenging questions raised by each panel member, which is fantastic, and something to think about. So what challenged you in what you've heard? So we're going to take about 15 minutes to talk about these questions. And then I don't know if some of you have been here the last webinar, we tried to do a poem. And one of the things that I would like to do is do it again, because this is an art-based webinar. And here's an example of the poem that I wrote, and I'll just read it quickly. And this is just an example of what your poem could be. And basically what we're thinking about is the poem is a compilation of your discussion about the questions, about the webinar, about whatever thoughts that you're thinking about regarding arts and peace building. So the poem goes, we are from Don't Drink Bleach, from soap and masks, and wherever you are, there you will be. We're from Staci, realize it's 9 days to the cyber conference, and the work you are doing is valued and worthwhile. We are from Inspiration, and our action will be look for local arts programs in our cities that support communities that are made vulnerable, and ask them what they need, listen, and if invited, help with capacity building through volunteering and fundraising. And so with that, we're going to do a breakout session, and we're going to have some facilitators to work with. So with that, I would love to start this round robin poem. And it looks like that we have Kathy, and then we have Nora, and then we have Justin. So if we could do that, and then we're going to end with some Q&A of kind of what was the experience. So Kathy, go for it.
Okay. But Anna's going to read ours, just so you know.
So we are from the importance of full creative expression from diverse spiritual beings and curiosity. We're from all over the world with one common purpose. We're transformative and creating happy people and spiritual expression.
And go ahead, Anna.
We are from Portland, New York City, and Jaipur, from experiential learning and a whole world view. We're from Nova Scotia and Switzerland and Southeast Asia, and evoking an emotional response. We're from community and family as core to being. Our action will be trying to understand and connect to the lived experience of others who are different from ourselves.
We are from Imagination, from Hong Kong, Nova Scotia. We're from the West Coast in the United States. The youth are already the new world we want to see, and we have these 3 braids. We're from hope, and our actions will be fostering processes that help us escape predefinition.
Fantastic, fantastic. That was so beautiful. And now we have time to have kind of an open discussion of everyone. What was that like for you to experience having a meaningful discussion, first of all, and also having a time to actually use some of your creativity in action? And this is for anyone to answer.
Well, I'll just say, this is Kim, that I love the opportunity to just be free with what we felt at the time. I think so often in art and creativity, for those of us who are a bit older, there's the judgment, is this right? Is people going to like it? Is it going to look good? And we can just let go of all that. And that's what I think the presentation shared, is this, it's more about the process and the journey and the storytelling as opposed to what's the thing going to look like. So it was, we each participated. I think everyone was wanting to say something, and and I think we came up with something that was quite wonderful. So it is about the journey, and it's about feeling freer, not worried about, is it going to be right in some way.
This is Andy. I do a little bit of consulting with some summer programs, and they're all moving online. And so I've been, they're family programs. And so I've been working to take these things that normally we would do in person and try and create a different version of it to send out in a packet to these families and get kids to engage their parents, or the other way around, families to spend time together and help the parents see the world through the eyes of their child. And so how to engage that, how to word the written part in a way. And then I've also been creating these little short videos that will be attractive to the kids and also to their parents, and get them to want to go do these things together, right? And I hadn't really been, I make little short videos like that all the time, but I hadn't really been thinking about that as a artistic process. Like, it totally is, and I feel that in my body when I'm doing it, but I hadn't really been thinking I'm doing art, right? I'm thinking, how am I going to engage these people? Oh, this looks really fun. Oh, I love that. It's so beautiful. And I'm weeping sometimes seeing these. I have a family I'm working with right now, or living with, and I'm seeing their kids do stuff. But just going through this process sort of helped me. I'm looking at what I've been doing the last month in a different way now, I guess, is what I'm trying to say, and appreciating it more. Yeah, I'm excited to share with a couple people on the panel here today some of that, what I've been doing, and get their feedback about this, so that I can do more and dig deeper the next time that I go through this process. So thank you for that.
One of the things that we were talking about in our small group was the power of story as method, right? Because it allows for an intersectional approach that takes into account all these different things that aren't typically spoken about. And so it possesses this sort of decolonial power. And one of the things, Andrew, that I was just thinking about was that there's this article, and I can send it to you, where it talks about how Uganda used to have rural education programs until the British came. And they had a few thousand of them, and they were built on a very simple principle, which is what you point to, which is that the child should never surpass the parents in learning. So they would learn together. And then when the British Empire came in, they said, this is not intelligible. This is not what we understand as traditional education. And they broke it up, and you had a few thousand education programs go to just a few dozen. And so it's interesting to think about that our forced isolation is allowing us to think from here in different ways that force connection, right, through story, and also allow for some type of decolonial assessment of what was. Fantastic. Thanks for sharing that, Andrew.
I want to interject here is that I posted some links in the chat that have where the actual poem was adapted to. And I'm also seeing, Spencer, your microphone is not on mute. Would you like to say something?
Yes, I just want to kind of like say my experience after these things. I think it's a fantastic things that Hillary's and Justin's and everyone is sharing their thoughts in here. What opened my mind, because we are facing the COVID things, you know, we are facing with the lots of issues worldwide, in America, in Hong Kong, places in here. And we've been pressured to find solution. And what strikes me when Hillary's and Justin mentioned, and we should not be, what's the right word? We need to be escaping predefinitions. You know, nobody knows what the futures will be, right? By expressing yourself in here, let the new worlds be the new world. And let's just let it happen. I mean, this is really, really powerful. Don't worry about the solution, just go for the process. And then, I mean, personally, I think this is very powerful, and it really kind of unlocked many of my notes we're facing over in Asia. Thank you.
It looks like that. Khaled, would you like to join the conversation and say something?
Sure. Thank you, Stacy, for giving me the opportunity. And I would like to thank everyone over here. Sorry, after starting the conversation, I was a bit distracted. I was helping my mom, and she is a cancer survivor. She was doing some kitchen works, so I had to go support her. So at that moment, I was just going through the news scroll. Till now, Bangladesh has been affected with COVID-19, with like 87,000, and near about up till today, 54 have died suffering from COVID-19. So Bangladesh is a very vulnerable state right now. Within that, I have been elected as a president-elect of Rotary Club of Chittagong Green City, which is within Rotary International District 3282, Bangladesh. So from my perspective of view, I would love to support the vulnerable communities who are suffering from this type of situations. I would like to create awareness like mass distribution, and most importantly, giving the proper knowledge about hygiene and with that. So being an optometrist, since I have to deal with eye care every time when I see a patient, so I first ensure my safety first, then I ensure the exact prescription for the patient. So what I realized that Rotary is a very great opportunity to work with the communities who are vulnerable. So looking forward with the elder Rotarians who are over here, we'll be looking forward what decisions you're taking. I'll be following that. Thank you, Stacy.
Thank you very much. Is there anybody else that wants to share their experience or insight?
Yeah, I would like to share the experience from Colombia, because normally we think that the artists are people who have a lot of free time, that they don't do anything for society. But in our experience, the art have been very important in the healing process, because there is a lot of people, victims of our armed conflict, that are saying things that they are not capable to say because they are scared, through the art, through different ways, not only poetry, but sculptures. And that's changing like the way we see arts. And also about this experience that we were creating the poem. At the beginning, I didn't understand what we were doing, but then when we started to make the brainstorm and so on, I think that something very important is that we feel like in a, like in a safe space, that you can say things and you are not going to be judged. And that's super important in a creative environment. At the beginning, everybody feels like shy to say, to share, but then when you create a safe space to say for some way, it becomes easier to be more creative. And I think that's also something that we have to encourage with the communities, with the clubs, with the people that we work with, to feel in a safe space.
So this is Kim. I just wanted to add to what Anna was saying. In our small group, somebody who said that arts can be a way to encourage women's voices. As we know, women's voices are so often silenced. And if women don't feel comfortable in speaking up for various reasons, they can express themselves through arts in a way that they can be heard in a different form. So it serves a really important function.
In light of creating space, I would love to create space for folks who haven't had an opportunity to share what their thoughts are. So are there anybody who hasn't shared, would like to share what their thoughts are? We have about 4 minutes.
Well, I would just say a few things. It's inspiring to be here and be free to express what we think. I think what is important as well too is the takeaways that we can do. I'm a Rotarian, so I would like to take this to our club. I'm also part of the Peace Subcommittee in our district. And I think, you know, listening and hearing everybody's point of view, I think I can relate to our communities because we've worked with a lot of autistic kids in the past. And sometimes you ask for kids to do a drawing, and you will see one drawing whereby a kid is actually, you know, like stabbing something, a ball or something, but he's expressing something that's hurting him. And then you might see another kid draw a flower, and you know that kid is feeling something different to the other individual. And I think that it's a way of expressing ourselves that I think we need to get out of people. Not a lot of people can communicate properly, and not a lot of people are allowed to communicate effectively or given the opportunity to express themselves because they will be intimidated by other people, as the case may be. So we see a lot of that in the communities, and I really think that it's something that we can give thought to in projects and communities that we operate and work in. So thank you for this, and thank you for everybody's presentation. Very, very well received. Thank you so much.
We have 1 more minute and then I'll wrap up. Does anybody have anything that they would like to say that hasn't said something?
I would just like to say, this is Anna, that I love that we've kind of figured out the poem. I think the first time we did this exercise, we had a harder time figuring it out. But we're learning as a community and then bringing new learners together with us. And I just love the poetry. I'm really grateful to you for thinking of such a creative way to get us thinking together in small groups, even though we're far apart from each other physically.
Well, thank you very much. I'm going to wrap up this fantastic conversation that we've had, unless anybody, I feel like it's interesting to be in a classroom of seeing people's faces. If anybody wants to say something, I really want.
I'd like to.
Do you still want us to write the poems in the chat? Sorry.
Yes.
Sure. Well, when the situation gets stable, I would like to invite all of you to come to Bangladesh, because Bangladesh is a very beautiful place to visit. It has got Sundarbans and world's largest sea beach over there, but you cannot have the as existing sea beaches facilities have like bars and ties, but it is because Bangladesh is a Muslim country and it maintains some regulations, but you'll have the best environment over here. So all of you are invited over there, and I'll maintain the hospitality with due respect. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Khaled. I would love to go to Bangladesh. So I'm the minute that we can travel, I'm there. Just to wrap it up, I want to go revisit what Justin was saying about kind of reimagining one's condition and thinking about particularly of how we can all not be complacent or complicit in the status quo, and how we can be more subversive and pushing against the status quo, in particular using the arts and also our peace building skills in our community, in the Rotary clubs that we engage in, and also in the lives that we touch and be with. Okay, with that, thank you so much for joining us. This is our last webinar. Drum roll, the cyber conference that's happening on the 26th and 27th. It's a 24-hour cyber conference, and I'm really going to put Martin on the hot seat to just say just a short little infomercial about the cyber conference.
Thank you. I feel like at this point, all the rest of you on this call know more about it than I do, given the interactions and all the transmutations that each of the regions have taken. I would encourage you all to be a part of it. And I think this is a sampler, thinking about getting better. We do keep getting better at these. And I think this was one of the most inspiring pieces that we've had. And so if this is any indication of how the momentum is growing towards this conference, it really bodes well for what we're going to be able to deliver as a team next Saturday. It's going to be next Friday for me, but I'm also realizing it's not actually the 27th on the in the Americas. It is the 26th is the actual start date. So been counting that down. We have 200 hours until that day, that time occurs. Is there anything else, anyone else on this call who's really been the leaders of this have to add to that?
Nothing to add. I just looking forward to the cyber conference. It's been a lot of work from a lot of Peace Fellows, and any of you who are not Peace Fellows on the call, you are definitely welcome and encouraged to join them. I look forward to it.
Yeah.
With that, thank you so much. And yeah.
Great. Thanks,
Thank you.
Yay.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you for putting this together.